Hi, welcome back to the Ruckus Feature Explainer series. Today we're going to talk about an important, when you're upgrading to ICX 8090, 8090 and going forward is going to only have the UFI image or the Universal Firmware image, which includes the boot code and the PoE code and the firmware all in a single file. And so in order to get there from previous versions, we need to go through a multi-step process. So um, basically, we're going to step through that. So I'm going to go from 8070 on up to 8090 UFI, and it's going to require 2 reboots and 2 different code loads. So it's easy. You just need to go through it to see that, right? So what's going to happen is so I've got 8070 in the primary and secondary, right? So primary, secondary in both. So step one, I'm going to upgrade my secondary flash to the 8090 bin file. So not the UFI, just the regular bin. So this will be the last version of code that there's a regular bin. Going forward, there will only be a UFI, but we've got to get there first. So we're going to upgrade our secondary to that bin file. We're going to boot into the secondary, and then we're going to upgrade our secondary into the UFI, right? So if anything goes wrong, we can always boot back to primary, but this is how we're going to do it, okay? So we'll see how that goes. So let me switch over to my console. So what we have is a stack of 7150 compacts, and so these guys have 8070E in the primary, 8070A in the secondary. They're running 10.1.15 boot code. What you're going to see when we're done with 8090 as well is there will be a primary and a secondary boot code. So that's a nice addition that comes with 8090. You get some redundancy in boot code as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to load the manifest file and upgrade the secondary. So we're going to copy TFTP to system, the IP address of the TFTP, the name of the manifest file, which of course you don't have to create that manifest file, right? It comes when you download the zip file from support and unzip it. It will all come in the right directories with that manifest file ready to go. And then we're going to do a all images secondary. So wants to know if you're sure. So we are sure, and it's going to upgrade my secondary to 8090. So that's obviously going to take a minute. And then when that's done, we're going to reload and we'll see where we're at then. Okay, so at this point, the system has completed copying the file from TFTP and then flashing it into all 3 of the units into secondary flash. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to boot the system to secondary flash. So boot system flash secondary, right? So I don't want to put this in the startup config. I'm just doing this temporarily, right? So if anything goes wrong, it's going to boot back to the primary flash where it started from. So we're going to temporarily boot it into the secondary flash. So again, I'm not in config mode. I don't do a write memory. I'm just doing a boot system flash secondary. Wants to know if I'm sure, which I am. So then it's going to send a reload request to the other units, and we'll reload this one in 3 seconds. So it's starting to reload now, and we'll be back in a minute up on 8090. Okay, so we're back up after the stack is rebooted, and one interesting thing you'll note here is it's giving me this warning that FI image is not booted from the UFI. Download the UFI image and reboot the system for full functionality. So you should not leave the system running off this binary. You should get the system up to UFI, which is where we're going to go next. So that's an important step. If we do a show flash now, we will see that my secondary is, the other units in my stack aren't up yet, but we'll see that my secondary is now 8090, and you'll see you have a primary and a secondary boot code. So as I mentioned previously, we now have a backup boot code, right? So that's a great addition to 8090. So once our stack is up and running, then we can continue with that UFI image. Okay, so we now have our stack members back up. So we have all three of our stack members. The stack members took a little while because they actually had to upgrade PoE firmware as well. So anyway, everyone is up and running at this point. So the next thing we need to do is do the UFI image. So that's just a copy TFTP to flash 192.168.1.31. And then it is going to be SPR 08090 UFI bin, and then we're going to, when the system stops doing that to me, we are going to copy that into secondary. So I could do it into primary right now, but I'm going to copy it into secondary just to be sure, right? Best practice says copy it into your non-booted flash, temporarily reboot into that new code, and if anything goes wrong, then it will boot itself back to primary by default. So we are again going to let that load into our secondary flash. Then we will be back in a second and do a boot system flash secondary again, get it back to where we need it, and then copy the secondary to the primary if it boots correctly. Okay, so we finished loading the UFI image into secondary flash. So if I do a show flash now, I'm going to see that image in the secondary. Well, it doesn't look any different, but that is the UFI that's in that secondary. So then once again, we're going to boot system flash secondary to get it to boot up into the secondary flash. So we'll then be on the UFI. So then it should update the boot code and the PoE firmware if needed, and then lastly we'll copy the secondary into the primary if it works, and we'll be done with it. So here we go. Okay, so system has come back up again. So if I show version, we should see that I'm on 8090 UFI booted out of my secondary, right? So it shows me 8090. It shows me that I'm on the UFI image. All of these were booted from the secondary. So system is up fine. I can see all my units. Everything is acting correctly at this point. So my last step is I'm just going to copy flash primary to copy that secondary UFI into the primary, and then I'm done with it. So at that point, when the system reboots on its own with a reload or after a power failure or whatever the case, it's going to boot to primary by default, and we now have the UFI in the primary and secondary. So going forward, as I said, from 8090 on, everything is going to be a UFI. So you're going to need to get to this UFI image. So don't just stop at that binary. Make sure you go forward and finish the UFI. But that's it. So I don't need to reload again. I'm loaded from the secondary, so I feel pretty confident that's fine. And the next time it reloads, it'll boot back to primary. So I'm just going to leave it in secondary. That's up to you. If you want to boot it back to primary when you're done, you certainly can. But I am not going to spend the time to do that. So that's it for today. And thanks for joining, and take care. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.